6 profound stories, lessons of life philosophy from God to help you live wisely. The River and the Desert, a journey of faith and transformation. In the land of Israel, there was a river that flowed from the high mountains, winding its way through lush valleys and villages, bringing life and nourishment to all it touched. But as it journeyed toward the barren desert, the river encountered an obstacle unlike any it had faced before. It reached the vast, empty desert, and as it entered, it discovered that its water was disappearing, sinking into the dry, thirsty sands. The river tried to find a way through the desert, but no matter the path it took, the water seemed to vanish, leaving the river disheartened and uncertain. The river was troubled and asked itself, "How can I continue on my journey when my purpose is to flow through this desert, yet I am disappearing into the sands?" As the river lamented, a voice echoed from the desert saying, "If the wind can pass through the desert, so too can the river." The river, confused, responded, "But the wind can fly while I am bound to the earth, flowing as water. How can I possibly do what the wind does?" The voice spoke again, "You must use the simplest method to move forward. If you cannot flow through, you must not disappear. Instead, become like a pond and let the wind carry you to your destination." The river hesitated. It had never been absorbed into anything before. It was used to flowing freely, maintaining its identity as a river. To lose itself, to give up its very nature. This was a thought the river could not bear. It feared that if it lost its flow, it might never return to being a river again. The voice continued, "The wind can help you. It will carry your water, lift you across the desert, and then release you. Your water will fall as rain. And when it lands, it will gather again and form a river." The river, still skeptical, asked, "But how can I be certain that I will return to being a river? What if I remain lost in the desert?" The voice responded gently, "If you do not trust in this process, you will remain isolated in this desert. You may turn into a swamp, but even a swamp takes many years to form, and it will never be the river you once were. Trust the wind, and you will return to your source." The river finally accepted the wisdom of the voice. It realized that it could not create a river in 2 different environments at once. But the voice also reminded the river, "You can still retain the essence of what makes you a river. Even now, though you are called a river, you do not fully understand the essence that makes you what you are." These words stirred a memory within the river. It recalled that in the past, part of it had been lifted by the wind. The river, feeling a spark of hope, decided to trust. It allowed the wind to carry it. The wind gently lifted the water, carrying it through the air, soaring over the desert. The river, once doubtful and full of fear, began to feel the sensation of movement that was both foreign and familiar. As the wind carried it high, the river thought, "Yes, this is what it means to collaborate. I can still be a river, even if I am not flowing through the earth." The wind finally brought the river to the peak of a great mountain, where it released the water gently onto the land below. The river watched as the water fell, and though it was not the same as before, it felt an overwhelming peace and understanding. While reflecting on this transformation, the river heard a soft whisper from the desert sands. "We have always been here, in the heart of the river, witnessing this every day. That is why we know the truth. The river must write its story upon the sand to continue its journey." The river, now understanding, realized that its journey was not just about moving forward in the same way it had before. It had to trust the process, allow itself to be transformed, and understand that its essence, its purpose, would remain even through change. In the Bible, we are reminded of the importance of trust and transformation. In Proverbs 3:5-6, it is written, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Like the river, we are often called to trust in God's plan, even when we cannot see the way ahead. We may feel lost or uncertain, but God's guidance is always with us. As the river gathered itself once more and began to flow again, it understood that change and transformation were part of its journey. It was not about staying the same, but about growing, trusting in God, and becoming the river it was always meant to be. This story is a reminder that, just like the river, we must trust in God's wisdom, knowing that he will guide us through even the most difficult challenges. The river's journey is like our own, one of faith, trust, and transformation. In Isaiah 55:8 and 9, the Lord tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." We may not always understand God's plan, but like the river, we must trust that He will bring us to the place where we are meant to be. 2. The light of the dawn. In ancient Israel, there was a wise rabbi who had many devoted disciples. His teachings were profound, often revealing deep spiritual truths hidden in everyday experiences. One day, as the rabbi and his disciples were walking along a dusty road in the early morning, the rabbi turned to them and asked, "Do you know when the night ends and the day begins?" The disciples, eager to answer, thought for a moment and then replied, "When people can distinguish between the herds of animals grazing in the distance, when they can tell the difference between a goat and a dog, that is when the day has come." The rabbi, hearing their answer, gently shook his head and said, "That is not the correct answer." Confused, the disciples asked again, "Then what is the correct way to know when day has come, Rabbi?" The rabbi smiled, his eyes full of wisdom, and replied, "The true sign that day has come is when we can clearly see the face of another person, when you can see your fellow brothers and sisters, when you can truly recognize each other and treat each other with love and respect. That is when the day has truly arrived. For if you cannot see these things, no matter the time of day, it is always darkness." The disciples were silent for a moment, contemplating the rabbi's words. They understood that the rabbi was not simply speaking about physical light and darkness, but about the light of understanding and love that comes from the heart. In the same way, the physical day and night are governed by the rising and setting of the sun. The spiritual day and night are governed by the light of God's love and wisdom in our hearts. Jesus often spoke of spiritual light and darkness in his teachings. In John 8:12, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The rabbi's words echoed this truth. The true light that illuminates the world comes from understanding and recognizing the value of others. To see others clearly, to love and care for them as God does, is to walk in the light of day. The rabbi's teaching was not merely about physical vision, but about spiritual perception. He was urging his disciples to see each other with eyes of love, compassion, and understanding. When they could do this, when they could recognize the needs and humanity of those around them, they would be living in the light of God's presence. This was the true meaning of daybreak in the spiritual sense. The disciples understood that the rabbi was teaching them a lesson far deeper than they had anticipated. It was not just about distinguishing between animals or knowing the time of day. It was about recognizing each person as a creation of God, seeing the face of God in each individual, and loving them as brothers and sisters in Christ. The rabbi was teaching them that true light comes from the ability to see each other through God's eyes. In Matthew 5:14-16, Jesus teaches his followers, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This was the lesson the rabbi was imparting to his disciples: to let their light shine, to recognize and acknowledge the worth of others, and to treat them with dignity and love. As they continued their journey, the disciples reflected on the rabbi's words. They understood that the light of day was not just about the sun rising in the sky, but about the light of love and understanding that shines within the hearts of those who follow God's ways. The rabbi had shown them that spiritual vision, the ability to see others with the eyes of Christ, was the true light that dispelled the darkness of ignorance, fear, and hatred. In the days that followed, the disciples began to practice what they had learned. They sought to see others clearly, to love them with the love of Christ, and to be a reflection of the light that had been shown to them. They knew that when they could recognize the face of Christ in each person, they would be walking in the true light of day. The rabbi's teaching echoed the wisdom found in 1 John 2:9-10, which says, "Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. The true sign of spiritual light is the ability to love and recognize the value of others, to live in harmony and unity, and to let that love shine brightly in a world that desperately needs it. In the end, the rabbi's lesson was clear. If you can see your brother and sister, if you can love them as God loves you, then you are walking in the light of God. When you do so, the light of day has truly come. The disciples left that day with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the true light was not in the sun above, but in the hearts of those who lived out God's love and grace. Not 3. The nature of a problem. For many years, Professor Adrian, a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania, stood before his students to teach the principles of law, justice, and reason. However, his lectures often went beyond mere legal principles. They delved into deeper matters of reasoning and discernment, teaching his students not just to think, but to think carefully and deeply. Every time he entered the lecture hall, he would write the numbers 2 and 4 on the board, then ask his students, "What is the answer?" Some students would quickly respond, 6, others would say 2, and a few would guess 8. A few students, however, would grow tired of the game and remain silent. After listening to the students argue and discuss, Professor Adrian would finally speak. "You are all missing the key to this problem. The real question is not simply the numbers, but what is the operation you should apply? Is it addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division? Until you understand what operation to perform, how can you know the answer?" His students often found themselves puzzled. What was the real issue? How could they answer correctly without understanding the nature of the question? And in many ways, the professor's lesson was not just about math. It was about life, reasoning, and discernment. In much the same way, Jesus taught his disciples that life's problems and questions could not always be answered by simply looking at the surface. The deeper issue often was not the problem itself, but how one approached the problem. Jesus often used parables to illustrate this point, inviting his followers to look beyond the obvious and seek understanding through faith, wisdom, and discernment. In Matthew 7, verse 7, Jesus tells us, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." This verse speaks to the importance of seeking the right understanding in order to find the answers to life's questions. Just as the students in Professor Adrian's class needed to understand the operation they were meant to apply, we too must seek wisdom and discernment to fully comprehend the challenges we face. The students were not wrong in trying to answer the question, but their answers were based on assumptions, on what they thought the question was, rather than seeking to understand it fully. In the same way, many people in life make decisions based on partial knowledge or assumptions, but they fail to seek deeper wisdom or understanding. Without that deeper insight, their answers might be misguided or incomplete. Jesus teaches us the importance of seeking wisdom from God, who is the source of all understanding. In James 1:5, it is written, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." Just as Professor Adrian encouraged his students to understand the nature of the problem before finding a solution, we are called to seek God's guidance before jumping to conclusions or making decisions in our own strength. The key to any problem, whether in life or in a classroom, is understanding the true nature of the question. Without understanding the foundational elements, any answer will be incomplete. In life, this means seeking God's wisdom and understanding his will for us. Without his guidance, we cannot navigate the challenges and questions that arise. The story of Professor Adrian's lesson is a reminder that true wisdom comes from seeking understanding and discernment. It's not enough to know the numbers or the facts. We must know how to apply them. Proverbs 3:5-6 teaches us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." In this way, we are called to look beyond the surface, to seek God's wisdom, and to trust that he will reveal the right answers to the questions we face. The students who had argued over the numbers were like many of us in life, trying to solve problems without understanding the deeper issue. But when they listened to the professor, they realized that only by understanding the operation, the how of the problem, could they arrive at the right solution. In the same way, we must seek to understand the deeper truths of life, to ask God for wisdom and to discern His will in all things. In the end, Professor Adrian's lesson was not just about math, but about the art of discernment. In life, as in the classroom, we must learn to seek the right understanding before we act. Just as the disciples learned to seek God's wisdom, we too are invited to seek the wisdom of the Father in all areas of our lives, trusting that He will guide us toward the right answers and the right path. Sakar 4. Divine Protection. During a fierce battle deep in the heart of conflict, Captain Elias, a seasoned officer, kept a watchful eye on the movements of his men. The air was thick with the sounds of artillery, and the sky was filled with the ominous hum of enemy aircraft. In the midst of this chaos, Elias suddenly noticed a plane descending rapidly towards their position. The instinct in such a situation would be to take cover immediately, to drop to the ground and protect oneself from the impending danger. However, in that very moment, Elias spotted a young soldier standing just a few meters away from him, oblivious to the approaching threat. Without thinking, driven by a sense of urgency and duty, Elias lunged toward the soldier, tackling him to the ground and shielding him with his own body. Just as they hit the earth, a deafening explosion rang out, and the shockwave of the blast sent dust and debris flying, covering both men in a thick blanket of sand and dirt. The earth trembled from the force of the explosion, and for a moment, everything seemed to fall into a haunting silence. Slowly, Elias and the young soldier rose to their feet, brushing off the dirt and debris that clung to them. It wasn't until Elias looked over his shoulder that his heart skipped a beat. The spot where he had been standing just moments before had now become a deep crater, a gaping hole left by the bomb that had exploded right in the spot where he had been. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had narrowly escaped death, not through his own cunning or strength, but through an instinct to protect another. In the midst of such peril, his selflessness had saved him. It was a reminder that sometimes, in helping others, we are also helping ourselves in ways we may not even understand. This story brings to mind the teachings of Jesus, who taught us the importance of love, sacrifice, and putting others before ourselves. In John 15, verse 13, Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Elias' actions that day embodied this profound truth. By sacrificing his safety to protect another, he not only fulfilled his duty as a leader, but also demonstrated the kind of love that Jesus spoke about, a love that goes beyond personal preservation and looks to the well-being of others. It is in moments like these, when one acts in faith and with love, that we may experience God's protection and grace. In Proverbs 11:25, it is written, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." Elias, in his act of generosity, not only saved the young soldier's life, but also found divine protection in return. His act of kindness became a reflection of the love that God calls us to show in our daily lives. Often, we find that by helping others, we are blessed in ways we never imagined. It's not just the physical act of helping someone that matters, but the heart behind it. God calls us to love one another selflessly, trusting that through our acts of service, He will also look after us. Jesus exemplified this in His own life, giving Himself for the salvation of others. His sacrifice was the ultimate example of how, in giving of ourselves, we can receive far more in return. In this instance, Elias was a living testament to that principle. His willingness to act selflessly, without hesitation, saved his life and the life of his comrade. It was not a mere coincidence, but rather a manifestation of divine providence. God had placed him in that situation, and in the act of love and sacrifice, He protected Elias from harm. This lesson echoes the teachings of the Apostle Paul in Philippians 2:4, where he urges believers to not look to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Elias did not think of himself in that critical moment. He did not consider his own safety above that of the young soldier. Instead, his actions were rooted in the call to love and care for others, just as Christ calls us to do. As Elias stood there, covered in dust and reflecting on the close call, he understood more deeply the significance of his actions. The protection he had received was not just the result of chance, but of a divine plan that unfolded through his willingness to put another's life above his own. In that moment, Elias realized that helping others is not only an act of kindness, but also a pathway to finding grace and protection in times of trial. God's protection often comes in the form of our actions toward others. When we are willing to serve, to love, and to protect those around us, God's hand is often there, guiding and shielding us from harm. As Jesus teaches in Matthew 25, verse 40, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Elias's selfless act in saving the young soldier was in essence an act of service to God, and in return, God provided him with the protection and grace he needed to survive. The lesson is clear. In times of danger and uncertainty, when we put others before ourselves, we align ourselves with God's will. Through our love, our kindness, and our willingness to serve, we open ourselves up to God's divine protection and blessings. Just as Elias found safety through his selflessness, we too can find protection and peace when we choose to live with love and service toward others, trusting that God will take care of us in the process. 5. The teaching of integrity. In the land of Israel, during a time of great turmoil and strife, there was a wise teacher named Rabbi Eliezer. He had traveled across many lands, teaching the principles of righteousness, justice, and truth. His followers admired his wisdom and sought his guidance in both times of prosperity and times of hardship. One day, as he journeyed with his disciples, they found themselves in a foreign land embroiled in conflict. The people of the land were at war, and the situation grew dire. The army of the enemy was advancing, and Rabbi Eliezer and his disciples were caught in the midst of the chaos. For days they had nothing to eat. They were surrounded by the sounds of battle and the desperation of the people, struggling to survive. Rabbi Eliezer, feeling the weight of the situation, found himself in great distress. On one occasion, his disciple Nathanael secretly managed to obtain a small portion of food. Rabbi Eliezer, hungry and exhausted, did not question how it came to him, but gratefully accepted it. Similarly, another disciple, Reuben, managed to acquire wine through questionable means, and Rabbi Eliezer, though troubled by the circumstances, drank it without asking further questions. Despite the desperate conditions, when a prominent leader from a nearby town came to visit Rabbi Eliezer, he suddenly transformed. He no longer appeared weary or desperate, but stood with dignity, his posture perfect, his actions deliberate and measured. The leader observed this transformation and remarked, "Rabbi, you have endured so much hardship, yet now you appear as though nothing has happened. Why the change?" Rabbi Eliezer, with calm wisdom, responded, "In those moments of hardship, I acted as the circumstances required. We were in a state of survival, and sometimes survival demands that we make difficult choices. However, when I stand before others, especially those who seek guidance, I must uphold the principles of righteousness and integrity. For, as the scriptures say, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Romans 12, verse 2. The way I conduct myself in private may differ from how I present myself in the presence of others, but I must always strive to reflect God's truth and justice. Rabbi Eliezer's disciples were deeply moved by his words. They had seen him endure great suffering without complaint, and now, in the face of honor and opportunity, he demonstrated the true character of a righteous leader. His response was a powerful lesson in the importance of integrity, even in the most difficult of circumstances. As the days passed, the disciples understood that Rabbi Eliezer's teachings were not just theoretical, but deeply practical. He had shown them that righteousness was not simply about outward appearances, but about a deep commitment to living in accordance with God's will, regardless of the situation. This lesson echoed the teachings of Jesus, who in Matthew 5, verse 14 to 16, said, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Rabbi Eliezer's actions demonstrated the principle that how we live, even in hardship, should be a reflection of our faith in God. His willingness to uphold righteousness in the face of adversity was a powerful witness to his disciples, showing them that even in the most challenging times, they were called to live with integrity and honor. The disciples asked further, seeking deeper understanding, and Rabbi Eliezer continued, "In times of trial, we may be tempted to justify actions that are less than righteous, but remember, the choices we make, whether in public or private, shape who we are. As James 1:5-6 teaches, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. We must seek God's wisdom in every circumstance, and he will guide us to make choices that reflect his love and justice." The lesson was clear. Righteous living is not determined by the circumstances we find ourselves in, but by the choices we make in those circumstances. Rabbi Eliezer's actions reflected a heart that sought to honor God in all things, even when survival demanded difficult decisions. His integrity, even in the midst of hardship, was a powerful example of what it means to live according to God's will. The disciples left that day with a renewed sense of purpose. They understood that righteous living is not a matter of outward appearances or the circumstances we face, but of the choices we make in alignment with God's truth. Just as Jesus taught in Luke 6:45, "A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of." Rabbi Eliezer's example showed them that even in the darkest moments, when life feels uncertain and difficult, our hearts should be full of righteousness, and our actions should reflect the light of God's love. Through his teachings and example, the disciples learned that true righteousness is a choice, one that we make every day, regardless of our circumstances. It is through this steadfast commitment to integrity that we can truly live as lights in the world, shining God's love and truth to all around us. 6. The true burden. In a small village nestled in the rugged mountains of Israel, there was a devout man named Levi, who had long dreamed of making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. His deepest desire was to visit the sacred places of Jerusalem, particularly the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane, where the Lord had prayed in his hour of greatest need. Levi had heard tales of the dangerous path that led to these holy sites, with steep slopes, sharp rocks, and treacherous cliffs. The journey was known to be long and arduous, but his faith and determination drove him forward. Levi knew that the road to Jerusalem would not be easy. He prepared only a small satchel, for he had heard that the air in the mountains was thin, and that carrying too much would make the journey even more difficult. He believed that by keeping his load light, he would be better prepared to reach his destination. As he traveled, the road grew steeper, and he encountered other pilgrims on the same journey. One day, as Levi was climbing a particularly narrow path, he noticed a young girl, no more than 10 years old, carrying her younger brother on her back. The girl was struggling, sweat pouring down her face, her breath coming in short, labored gasps. Levi, concerned for the child, approached her and gently asked, "Child, why do you carry him? The road is long and treacherous, and you are so small. Why not let him walk on his own?" The girl, looking up at Levi with a determined expression, replied, "Only the things you carry are important to you, but why are my burdens less important? This is my brother. He is my responsibility." Levi was taken aback by her words. In that moment, he realized the depth of what she was saying. Yes, the burden she carried was heavy, but it was a burden of love, a responsibility born out of devotion to her brother. Her load, though physically challenging, was not something she would ever consider putting down, for it was her love that gave her the strength to continue. Levi thought about his own journey and the weight he carried. He had chosen to carry only a light bag, but the burden he truly carried was not measured by the weight of his belongings. It was the responsibility he carried as a servant of God. Just as the girl carried her brother out of love, so too must Levi carry his faith and his duty to others with love and devotion. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus invites all who are weary to come to him for rest, saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The burdens we carry in life are not always physical. Sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones we carry in our hearts, our responsibilities, our worries, and our commitments. But when these burdens are born out of love, they become easier to bear. Levi understood now that the weight of a burden is not simply determined by its physical weight. The true weight of a burden is shaped by the heart with which it is carried. Love transforms even the heaviest loads into acts of grace. When we carry our responsibilities, whether they are to our family, our faith, or our community, with love, we are able to bear them with strength and joy. As 1 John 4:19 teaches us, we love because he first loved us. Love is the foundation of all that we do, and it is through love that we find the strength to carry the heaviest burdens. Levi was also reminded of the example set by Jesus, who, though he bore the weight of the sins of the world, carried that burden with love and compassion. In John 15:13, Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Jesus' sacrifice was the ultimate demonstration of love and responsibility. He carried the burden of humanity's sins, not because it was easy, but because his love for humanity was greater than any hardship he faced. As Levi continued his journey, he reflected on the lessons learned from the young girl and her brother. He understood that his own burdens, his faith, his responsibility to others, could be transformed by love. He knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he could face it with courage and strength, as long as he carried his burdens with love, just as Christ had done. In Philippians 4:13, Paul writes, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." When we rely on God's love and strength, the burdens we carry become lighter, and the path we walk becomes clearer. Just as the young girl carried her brother with love and devotion, we too are called to carry our responsibilities with the same love and devotion, trusting that God will give us the strength to endure. Levi's journey was not just one of physical distance, but of spiritual growth. He learned that the true weight of a burden is not in its physical weight, but in the love with which we carry it. And as he continued on his path, he knew that with God's love in his heart, he could bear any burden and face any challenge. Just as Jesus walked his path with love, we too are called to walk our paths, carrying our burdens with love and faith.